Hey folks, Adam here, co-founder at OpenOrg. Welcome to another employer brand transparency breakdown. This time we're going to be looking at a company called Beamery, who some might be familiar with. Beamery are, I think, Series C or Series D tech scale-up business in the talent management space. So do a lot around helping companies improve hiring and how they handle, manage, and develop talent internally, I believe. So could be an interesting one. Expecting to see hopefully a company here that does a really good job on drinking its own champagne, I suppose, when it comes to how it approaches and handles the hiring process, but also how it communicates with its own talent around how it's going to help develop people, grow people once they're in the business. And of course, I've picked Beamery here because one of the core values of the business is centered around transparency, which we'll see in a minute. So we'll dive in. There's a lot to look at. They've got a full-blown careers site to dig through, and there's some really great stuff actually there as well that I want to pinpoint and look at. And we'll have a quick peek at Glassdoor at the end as well, just in case there's anything there to align on and pull back in here to elevate, which could be useful to bear in mind. So Beamery, let's jump in. So first page on the career site here, you've obviously got the opportunity to search your jobs. We'll go back to a job in a minute and have a bit of a peek around. It's cool to see mission front and center. I like that a lot. I have watched the recruitment video. I won't try and play it now. You won't be able to hear it. How do I sum it up? It's not necessarily the most informative thing in the world. It's quite fun, quite interesting. It's got some personality to it, which I do like. So that's definitely a pro. From a con perspective, it didn't really tell me much as an applicant about who Beamery are and what they're about. So it's fun, but it's not the most informative video. But that completely depends on the tone that companies are trying to go for, I suppose. You've got a section just further down below here, which is a little bit like meet the team type section. Now, I dived into these. We'll have a quick look actually now. So this is like engineering, product design. I had a quick peek at these. It didn't tell me a great deal about the team itself. So let's have a quick look. So it gives me a bit of an insight into some key tenets, I suppose, that the engineering team think about or stick to. There's a video here as well, which again I won't play. Again, honestly, it didn't tell me much more about what the engineering, product, and design team do. There was actually the last one I looked at was the other one on the sales and commercial team page. If anyone was to watch it, again, the tone is fun, interesting, bubbly. Lots of sharp, short snippets of people saying how great life is at Beamery, but there's not much depth there in terms of what is life actually like here. What does a day in the life look like for me? What's the best day look like? The worst day? How's it been tough? Things like that. So I didn't really get much of a sense of anything too in depth here with regards to how the team actually works, operates, what they look like, feel like, how they think, communicate, that sort of stuff. So that's one way to possibly elevate these employee stories and team stories, I suppose, is adding a little bit more depth rather than just the sort of come work here, everything's amazing and great, because whilst those things are generally accepted as being useful on career sites, they're a little bit cookie cutter at times now. And I think companies can do a lot more to elevate around how they utilize those employee stories sometimes. There's a call to action here to look more at culture, which we'll go to in a minute, because that's a separate page, which is very, very cool. I like that. And it's quite cool that they've got like a talent community that you can join and become part of in case you want to keep an eye on any upcoming roles. So that's homepage. Let's jump a little bit more into the rest of the site here. So I'm going to skip actually, let's have a quick look at what we do, because there's a couple of things on here I noted that might be worth having a bit of a peek at. So I've already given a quick idea as to what Beamery do as a business. Now, there's a section on here. It's actually a quote from co-founder CEO about companies needing to fundamentally transform their hiring process. This jumped out at me specifically because I thought, okay, this is interesting. I would now want to find out what Beamery do around their own hiring process. How deep does it go? How innovative is it? Have they transformed how they hire? we'll keep an eye out for that later, but we'll come back to that quote shortly, because that type of thing jumps out at me personally. It makes me think, okay, are they drinking their own champagne? How are they doing it themselves? If they're forefront of pioneering change in this space, I want to know what that looks like. There's a section here around the fact that they're backed by the best. This is cool. It's very useful to see or get an idea as to the fact that they're a funded business. Some ways in which some companies elevate here is actually giving a little bit more depth as to detail on how much they've raised and when. I think actually somewhere on the site that I did find that against the timeline of where they've come from in terms of their story and their background. You could possibly just bring a little bit more elevation into this by just giving a little bit more of an idea as to how much have we raised, when was our last raise. You don't have to go into loads of depth around your finances. I saw something on Glassdoor, which again we'll look at later, around the fact that the company has started to, in recent times, talk more transparently around its finances to employees, but you could share a little bit more of that externally with people to understand how much have you raised, what funding stage are you at, etc. That might just help bring a little bit more depth to that section there on that particular page. Locations. This started to get interesting here on this page now as well. I'm starting to want to get a bit of a feel for how this business operates, and the fact that they've got locations suggests that they're in office or partly in office at least. So what I'm reading right now is that this company seems to be one that is primarily in office. They're talking actively about their office spaces and how they've adapted to COVID, which is cool. That's fine. You read about the London headquarters here, for example. So this is a bit confusing, if I'm completely honest. And I'm trying to take as objective a view as this as possible. I don't care whether a company's personally fully remote or in office. I like a bit of both if it's myself. But I'm a bit confused by this page here. So it says you'll either be a hubber or remote if you're in London. So I immediately think I've got the choice, but I'm not entirely sure yet. So it says here, hybrid. Typically, hybrid workers come into the office 2 days a week and live within zone 1 to 6. Remote, typically remote workers come into the office once a quarter, but you can come in more if you want. So I am a little bit confused by this, if I'm completely honest. I'm trying to understand whether living in zone 1 to 6 in London means I automatically am a hybrid worker and therefore I have to come in 2 days a week, and therefore if I live outside of zone 1 to 6, am I classed as remote? Or if I live within zone 1 to 6, could I pick one of these two options? I'm not really too sure. And I know that further down here it says that you might be able to have a conversation about what your preferred status is, and we can sometimes make it's a bit confusing. So a little bit more clarity on exactly what the policy is here would be helpful, just because as a potential applicant, I'm in the dark a little bit with understanding how I'm going to be working day to day if I join Beamery, as someone who's potentially joining the London HQ. There's a little bit more clarity reading further down here about the US. So we're fully remote in the US. Great. Perfect. That's very, very straightforward and simple. But again, I won't go through all of them, but there's just a little bit of lack of clarity, particularly with that London one, that I think probably could be improved upon a little bit if you really wanted to. I think that would be potentially very, very useful. Just going to have a quick flick at the story page. I really like a backstory, particularly when you can talk about founders. Why is the business a thing? And where does it come from? This feeds a lot into purpose. So it's really, really cool actually to see a story page. And I enjoyed reading this when I had a bit of a flick through. I won't read through the entire page of you now. I like the timeline as well. Just gives me a little bit of an idea as to how the team's grown over time, where it's come from, the speed at which it's grown. They actually have given some clarity here around the numbers when it comes to their funding rounds. So again, I like that a lot. That's really, really cool. And it gives me a little bit of added depth that I didn't have previously before. So the story page, actually really nice, like it, and it gives a good timeline. I'm going to skip past the teams page because I touched on them earlier on the homepage. They're nice. I wouldn't say that they necessarily give me the depth that I would like if I'm applying for one of these teams to really understand how these teams work. So again, an idea for elevation here is to feed some of your cultural nuances into some of these team pages. How do these different teams work, operate, communicate? Do they have specific requirements for coming into the office, maybe that other teams don't. This is your opportunity to really personalize some of these pages here that I think could be helpful. What I really want to dive into is some of the life at Beamery pages, because there's some really interesting stuff in here I think we can look at and talk about. So let's just look at our culture, because I got really excited whenever I see like a culture tab. I get super excited about what I'm going to go and see. So our culture and values, and this is actually where you start seeing a little bit more about transparency, which is very cool. So our values, I won't go through all of them, but I'm just going to point out the fact that we've got communicate openly as one of those, default transparency, love it, well done, awesome. Again, as I would say to 99% of people and companies that I see, this is useful, but even the bullet points are a little bit further than a lot of companies would go, but try and give a little bit more depth to some of these. And I use transparency as a bit more of an example. Try and define what this means. Default to transparency. Does that mean you're going to be sharing finances on a monthly or quarterly basis with the team, or does it mean you have salary transparency in the business? It means different things to different people. So trying to give a little bit more idea to people now as to what that actually means in your company will help people to opt in or opt out. And I think that's really, really helpful to think about. There's a statement here around the fact that you creating access to opportunities. I'm starting to feel like this is a business that invests heavily in career development on the face of it, and that makes sense with regards to your product as well. So thinking about like the talent life cycle, that's really cool. I want to join a business here potentially that really seems to be at the forefront of thinking about how it develops and moves people around the business. And again, there's some allusion to that shortly in a minute as well, but it doesn't go any deeper than that. Other than that right now, as a culture page, I don't feel like I've necessarily had as much as I possibly would have liked to before I clicked into the page. I can see the values posted here, but this feels more like a values page rather than a culture page. There's not really anything else about culture in here specifically. So the values is a great start. There's a possibility to elevate this, I think, by getting a lot more in here about your culture. And this is where you possibly can elevate and go deeper on some of the values that you've talked about here, which I think could be an interesting thing to play around with. Thinking more about the behaviors you do and don't want to see in the business, maybe incorporating something about how you communicate, how you meet, how you default to feedback, and all of that sort of good stuff. I think that really brings your culture to life and helps people really understand what life at Beamery actually is genuinely like. So I'm going to have a quick look next at the benefits page as well. Quite cool to see that there's an entire page dedicated to benefits. Hoping to see some depth here, which would be really good. Let's have a quick peek at some of them. Quite cool to see that there's a minimum number of holidays stated, even though you've got unlimited. I like that. Companies struggle to communicate that sometimes, and it's nice to see that you've put your flag in the sand there. That's really, really cool. It's quite confusing or vague to see competitive salary. I haven't seen anything about salary or compensation yet. Haven't looked at any actual jobs. So I'll go back and have a peek at those in a minute. But competitive salary right now doesn't really give me much more. And equity, a high level statement. So I'm hoping I'll see a little bit more about equity later on, considering we've got an entire page here on benefits, of course. I think that would be potentially very, very helpful. It's nice to see some clarity and depth on things like maternity, paternity leave. So breaking down the primary and secondary caregivers is nice, and you've actually put some specifics there around how much time people get off and how much it's actually paid at is really useful. So big kudos on that, because lots of companies don't go that far. What also caught my eye here too is the Beamery University upskilling our people. That was amazing. I loved seeing that initially, because I thought, okay, here's a company that is leaning into talent management with their product. So I'm expecting them to be really, really front and center with regards to how they develop and upskill people. And the fact that they've got a Beamery University is really cool. However, put a pin in that, because there's maybe something to come back to in a minute when we look at that page. But it did get me initially very, very interested and excited. Yeah, as a benefits page goes, it's pretty good. it maybe could be elevated in a couple of ways, but overall, it's quite nice to see some breakdown there, and that you could always go deeper with these things. So overall, I think it's a relatively good page. I'm gonna just have a quick peek at Beamery University, because that's something that jumped out at me on the benefits page, and I want to have a bit of a deeper dive at what this university thing is, because I'm really interested as a prospective applicant now. So thinking more about how this company is going to train me, upskill me, etc. What does this look like? Skipping down to the sort of training I receive, I became a little bit confused when I started reading this. So there's a couple of sections here that make a lot of sense and I really, really like. So number one, interviewing and hiring training. Awesome. There's not many companies that really invest in doing that well. So if I'm going to be able to join and get some experience and some training on something like this, then that's really, really good. The new user products training is useful. If I'm honest, I would expect that as a default thing to joining any business anyway. No one would expect to join a business usually and not have any sort of training on what their product is and how it works. So for me, it doesn't feel like an additional benefit to my growth. It feels like a default thing that any company would be providing. And what I'm hoping to see here about, if there's a university sell or product or something like that on offer is something that's going to be over and above that. And something else that just confused me a little bit here is the pre-boarding and onboarding piece as well. This doesn't really feel like it's training for me. It's more about the fact that you're sort of saying that you've got this great onboarding program, so we're going to make sure that we've invested in bringing you on board, but it doesn't tell me what I'm going to be taught during that onboarding phase, if that makes sense. So it doesn't really feel like it fits into a page that is about showing me what I'm going to learn. It sort of feels almost like more like an onboarding page, and it feels a little bit confused, some of the messaging on here. So I'd maybe elevate this a little bit. I think there's an opportunity, by the looks of things, you've invested in onboarding. I think there's a really nice opportunity to build out a completely separate page around onboarding and hiring, and what that's going to look like for someone that can really elevate that candidate experience a lot. And then maybe talk a little bit more to separating some of these other sections off around interviewing and hiring training and so on and so forth. Management training, super interesting as well. Love that. Not many companies do this or even do it well. Love to see a little bit more depth on this too. And I think you've got opportunity, if you're dedicating a page about this, to go deeper on this as well and get people really interested and invested in that. Also, very interested to see there's a DEI page. Again, most companies don't really give any real airtime, as it were, or space to this topic, other than a couple of sentences on a job advert. So on the face of it, huge kudos for having a page on this. And it looks as though the company has been really progressive and proactive at trying to think about how they approach diversity, equality, inclusion. They talk about working with a business, Fair HQ, who I've come across a few times and heard good things about. So it's really cool that there's evidence there that they're working with someone that's nice. Couple of graphics here to show a little bit about where they are, although I can't see it's dated or anything like that at the moment. So, but it's good to see that there's some principles that have been built out from the work that they've done. That's good. I like it. If you scroll a bit further down, however, my level of trust starts dropping in this page, which is a real shame because I found it really interesting at first. But when I look at the ENPS score, which looks on the face of it to have curved up very, very nicely over a couple of quarters, if you look a bit closer, the dates on that are quite old. This is from 2 years ago. So it's quite a long time to go. And who knows what the ENPS score looks like now. And actually, a glance at the Glassdoor page, albeit I always said take Glassdoor with a real pinch of salt, there's a completely different trend on Glassdoor around reviews. So I'm left in a little bit of uncertainty here. I know this specifically is around inclusion and diversity and not about more general reviews about the business, but I've lost a little bit of trust here because it's such an old graph. It's such an old data point that I'm sort of wondering why there's not something more relevant, more up to date. And it's a bit of a shame because there's some really interesting stuff that's been pointed out on this page and it does look good. But because that date is so old, it's now sticking in my mind. Everything I read and see further down on this page doesn't really feel trustworthy to me. They talk about long-term commitments, for example, which is really nice, and it's good to see some percentages there. But it talks about the fact that today, over 52% of our team. Does that mean today is in 2024, or does it mean today is in 2022? And how has this figure changed? So, just thinking constructively, it'd be really, really helpful to maybe try and, if you're going to have a page like this dedicated, if you want to really show people that you are committed and care, you've got to try and keep this a bit more up to date and keep it relevant. I want to see some 2023 stats on there, in the end of 2023 at the very, very least. Only a quarter or two as far back as that will really help me build some trust in what I'm reading here. Otherwise, I've sort of lost a lot of that trust at the top of the page, sadly, and that's a real shame for me. Anyway, I won't. I'll let everyone dig through that in more depth if they want to, but that's just some feedback on that page. It's really great to see it, and awesome work getting it set up. But I sort of feel, to me, like an applicant, as though there's been some good work started a couple of years ago, but I'm sort of feeling like maybe I'm making a narrative up here completely, but people will do that. I'm wondering whether it's maybe dropped off, or the impetus isn't there anymore. Who knows? But without that up to date data, it's hard to know, if I'm honest. Quick glance then finally at how we hire, and then we'll have a quick look at a job ad as well, and round off with Glassdoor page 2, because I think that's useful to have a quick peek at, just in case there's anything there to spot again constructively, in terms of elevating what is being messaged and shown to people externally. So how we hire. I've been waiting for this. I've been looking for this because I saw that quote from the co-founder earlier on about innovating and improving hiring process generally, and that's what they're all about as a business. So flick down some of these. It's interesting. They're giving a bit of an idea as to the sort of things that they look for when interviewing. That's useful. It's nice to see an interview process outlined here. That's really, really cool. And it's also nice, actually, by the way, that they they do say that most processes will look like this, but some will differ. It's okay for them to differ. It's just quite nice to see a company say that, by the way, this is a typical interview process, and they will differ. So again, well done, Beamery, for at least pointing that out, because it sets some expectations, at least, that not everything is going to look exactly like this. And if you read further down as well, they've been pretty bold about the fact that processes should take this long or that long, or you should get feedback within these days or these days. So I've got pretty high expectations as a candidate right now about what that feedback will look like once I am in the process or not. There's a couple of things you could do if you really wanted to go further, and this is not necessary at all, but really, really helpful. Rather than talking about what your intention is, you could build a lot more trust around this process by sharing real-time metrics and data. So not what our time to hire will be, but what is our actual time to hire based on our business metrics that we track right now. Most companies at this stage will have all of this information there. Share it. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad, it's the truth, and it's where you are. So don't set false expectations or hopes by saying we hope to have this wrapped up in 2 weeks average if it's actually going to take 5 weeks. Just tell people exactly what that looks like, and you build a lot more trust by sharing that information. Not many companies will do that, so it's not a necessity, but it is a nice way of elevating some of the pages when you see talk about hiring process and interview process and so on and so forth. But anyway, overall, nice to see that there is a page around how we hire, and there's some opportunity again to elevate that if you wanted to. Let's just go back and have a really quick look at a job advert, because one or two things are still missing for me at the moment. I still don't have a lot of clarity around how I'll work, where I'll work, salary, and compensation is a huge missing piece for me as well. So I'm just going to dive into a random ad. This is a senior product operations manager in London, UK. So I won't read this job ad in total depth. That's not what I'm here for. What I'm looking for very quickly is something around compensation, which I can't see on this page right now. I'm not saying as a transparent company you must have salary listed on your page. There's sometimes reasons why there's not there. So I'm not saying that must be in place if you've got transparency as a value. But generally speaking, if you see a company that is defaulting to transparency in their core values, you would expect to see a little bit more information around compensation. And I haven't seen that yet. I'm just going to flick through first to make sure I'm not missing anything huge. I can see benefits here. So yeah, there's nothing on here about salary. There's no elevation there around equity, which was mentioned in benefits. So I don't really get much of a feel for, what I'm going to be paid in this role. And as I flick through, I don't really see too much more clarity either on um, where I'll be working. So going back to that hybrid remote setup, I don't know yet whether I'm going to be in the office 2 days a week or whether I can choose or decide, whether I'll find that out in an interview. It's a little bit unknown. So there's a few ways you could elevate this job advert a little bit, and I think that's probably just by bringing some more clarity into those two really cool things that people do look for is salary and compensation. Even if you can't show the figure or the band, can you give a bit more of an idea as to how you think about compensation? How do you benchmark? What data do you use? How do you make these decisions that actually create that competitive salary that you've promised on the benefits page? And what does competitive salary mean, by the way, as well? People want to see that you've benchmarked against typically a market average, and they're probably expecting that salary to be somewhere between average and 100th percentile, as it were. So where do you sit within that, and can you show people what that actually means? I think is a really, really good way of trying to elevate this here. So that would definitely help. I like that there's something here linking to diversity, equality, and inclusion. So good work on that. It's a little bit more depth than some companies will go to when it comes to this topic. Although, again, I circle back to my point around how old that data is on that page. A page is only as good as how relevant and up to date that data is, and that trust was lost a little bit for me when I saw that. So I just want to round off for a few minutes and have a really quick look at Glassdoor, because this maybe just gives me a little bit more insight into ways and areas in which companies can elevate and improve on things. So start off with interviews first, because this is a business here who is at the forefront of improving talent and talent management and how companies approach that. They've got a page on hiring process. So I'm really hoping that the candidate experience for this business is going to be through the roof. I don't see that immediately. I don't care too much about interview difficulty. That doesn't worry me too much. That's cool. The slightly concerning thing for me, I suppose, reading this, and maybe this is typical Glassdoor, so again, take it with a pinch of salt. I'm not saying it's amazing or not, but 51% positive interview experience versus 41% negative feels not too great to me on the face of it as a candidate. I'd be hoping to see a little bit more as a company that's leaning into improving talent and hiring for companies here. And I'm not going to flick through all of these. And actually, if there's only a few really, really recent relevant interviews, but there's a couple on here that do talk about lack of feedback, lack of response. I know it's hard, and I know all companies struggle with this, but just going back to the page around hiring process, there are a lot of promises made on that page around feedback times and very specific SLAs. My wider point, without trying to be too negative, will be don't try and make promises that maybe aren't going to be kept in true candidate experience that might end up then on Glassdoor. If you can't commit to specific levels of feedback, don't make those promises on that hiring process page. How you go about doing it is completely up to you. But, if you're going to make those promises on a career site, make sure you can follow through to them, really, really, really well. Otherwise it will end up, causing more negative interview experience. And it only ends up in places like this, which, again, I'm not a big fan of Glassdoor. I'm just trying to use this to help people understand how they can maybe limit the negative reviews they might get on places like this, I suppose. So quick peek at this. More generally when it comes to Beamery. So we've got a few reviews here. Let me just try and find a couple here. I don't want to flick through all of these necessarily, so I'm just going to pick out a few. Overall, some positive reviews. We're middling there in terms of like 3.6, and I won't go into depth on this, but there's some trending downwards, which you've seen in a lot of companies in recent times because of what's happened in the last 12, 24 months. So I make no massive judgments there, and it's not for me to dive into that too much. But what I do read on some of these, and what I've taken away from having a bit of a deeper dive on this, is there's a lot of chopping and changing in management from the looks of things. There's been some uncertainty with layoffs. There's some chaos and uncertainty there with regards to product changes and changes of direction and so on and so forth. Now, that doesn't, I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily, but what I am taking from this as a possible bit of feedback into career sites, what can you take from this if you feel like it's true, and feed into your careers page so you can start really setting expectations of people that might be joining your business as to what they're going to be coming into here. Now, I'm not saying it has to feel negative, but whereas at the moment on the careers page, there's a lot of talk around the fact that this is a really fun, exciting place. Come and work here. Lots of short, sharp, positive sound bites on videos, which I haven't played, but people could definitely go and have a little read of. It feels like the best place in the world. And lots of career sites will do that. You've got a better opportunity here with your culture page and other pages to really start feeding into like, what do you get here? Who's going to thrive and who's not going to thrive? And there's some really honest feedback, even on the really good reviews, about what people should be aware of and what they're coming into. You've got some really positive reviews here on Glassdoor, giving you 5 stars from employees, but with some really constructive cons. And you should look a bit deeper at some of these cons, in my opinion, because you've got some really, really positive ones, not this one. You've got some really, really positive reviews on here. 4 stars, great. I think you've got some really constructive feedback on here from people that you could feed into genuine employee stories on the website. And that's a really interesting exercise for you to go through, is like, don't just dismiss the Glassdoor reviews as being negative. Look at the cons, read them, try and understand what people are saying, because they're not saying this is a terrible place to work. They're trying to highlight some of the tougher aspects of this environment. And you can really use that. That's really powerful to lever into your career site to help people understand whether they should or shouldn't apply. And the more people you can repel who aren't going to thrive and survive in your company, the more positive your Glassdoor page will end up being one day, the more positive your culture will be, the more success people will have. So this can be used. As much as I don't love it and I'm not a huge fan, my general advice is have a really good dig through this. Don't be scared of it. Don't dismiss it. You've got some really good reviews here still, and you can utilize some of these, even with the negative ones as well. So anyway, high level overview and thoughts. There's some really nice depth on the Beamery careers site, and it is an entire site, which is really cool. I like the fact that they spend a bit of time having dedicated pages to things like culture, like diversity, like hiring process. My feedback would be that some of them could go a little bit deeper, and some of them seem to have fallen by the wayside a little bit. I'm untrusting of how recently, for example, the DEI page has been updated. Some of the pictures there and screenshots are from 2022. So I've lost a little bit of trust there, despite there being a page dedicated to it. Feels a little bit performative to me, and I'm making that narrative up, but that's my right as an applicant. The hiring process could possibly go a little bit deeper, but it always could. But there's some really, really good positives to what Beamery have got here as well. I just think there's some possibility to elevate and go deeper on some of these areas, and also to pull in some of and embrace some of the feedback that you're seeing in Glassdoor, because there's some stuff here that I see that doesn't have to be negative, but could really help improve how you hire as a business, the type of people that come in, and the type of people that have a chance to opt out as well. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Hopefully this has been useful to a few people, and see you next time.